Hello and happy Friday. Welcome to Boilermaker Lounge. I am Sam Sprunger, joined by Grant Flora. Grant, it's Friday. We're moving ever so slightly, but closer to October/November.
Yeah, it'll be here in due course for sure, but in the meantime, we've got still a whole summer. I tell you, this weather has been crazy in Indiana. It's been like 50s and windy and overcast with some rain. It feels like March, and I'm
Uh-huh.
kind of over it, but uh, it's really frustrating. Yeah, even for Indiana, this is bad.
I told my father-in-law last night that if we hadn't had the few days of, the 80s, 70s and 80s, we might be okay with it, but 55
Yeah,
after we've been spoiled is actually kind of cold.
yeah. When it gets warmer and then comes back down, that's where it
Yeah.
gets you for sure.
Yeah,
But
it's not cool. It's not cool, Mother Nature. We need to stop.
yeah,
But
yeah.
let's we're evaluating the transfers that the Boilermakers have added these over the offseason, into the offseason already from the transfer portal. We're talking about Oscar Cluff and Liam Murphy, both major pieces in the grand scheme of things. And I don't know, honestly, uh, Grant, how many people knew that these two were going to be the targets for Purdue and how major they are? Because while they're not going to be main pieces for the most part, I mean, Cluff is going to be a huge piece, I think, but they're not the prototypical, hey, we're going to go get the best guy in the portal. They got guys that they thought would fit into their culture and their roster better.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Like they aren't the big names or the guys that are gonna pull the most NIL money or whatever that you expect from
Right.
Donovan Dents and the Axel Endeborgs of the world. But they do fit a lot of the holes that Purdue has, and I also think they fit the culture really well, like you said. Um, Cluff is gonna come in. I think Cluff will likely start at the beginning of the season, but
Yeah.
obviously we're not gonna know anything regarding that until the season gets closer. Liam Murphy will come off the bench most likely and play kind of like a Mason Gillis role. So um, I think they're both roles that Purdue needed to be filled, and I think these guys are definitely set to help in that area. But at the same time, you're right. It's not like they picked up one of the big stars, but I
Right.
think they still will make an impact in a pretty big way. Especially Clough with his rebounding, that's going to help kind of shore up a hole that Purdue had that was a pretty big problem last year, um,
Yeah.
size and rebounding around the rim. So that should be pretty good, and I'm excited especially to see how Clough fits in. But both of these guys have a pretty unique skill set compared to the rest of the team that they're going to bring to the table.
Well, for one thing, Oscar Clough is from Australia, so he's not U.S. born. So that's one thing that we're used to with our big men in the middle. But he comes from South Dakota State, where he averaged over 17 points, 12. He led the nation in rebounding with 12 rebounds plus a game, and like you said, that was the major void in the Purdue offense. I mean, Jacobson getting hurt, that made the void even bigger. But even if he's healthy, I think there's still a big drop in what Purdue does when Jacobson either gets in foul trouble or comes off and needs a rest if he's healthy. So I think it would still have been a big issue, and I think that was probably why Cluff was he signed first, so I'm going to assume he was their main target. That was their big downfall, and their thought in their roster is, Jacobson went down. Nothing against Caleb First, but he's 6'10". He's not, he's not the force. He was a good fill spot. Like he would have been a good sub in for a few minutes. But it's kind of like in football, people get mad at the starting quarterback and they want that backup to come in because he's great. Well, he comes in and he wins a couple of games maybe, but all of a sudden he's got to play more as a starter, and you start to see why he was the backup. And that's not knocking Caleb First at all. That's just saying, his role as a starter wasn't the key. It wasn't what Purdue absolutely needed from him. It was him coming off the bench and helping out, and I think Cluff is the remedy. We fully expect Daniel Jacobson to be 100% come next season. We expect it, but what happens when let's say Jacobson's the starter for that, and yeah, I know you and I both kind of feel that probably Cluff will start, but let's say Jacobson is a start. Well, when you've got 6'11" who led the nation in rebounding coming off the bench, you feel a lot better about that.
Yeah. Caleb First was never meant to be the starting center on this Purdue team. That is for
Right.
sure.
Right.
He didn't even play the 5 spot all that much until maybe like the year before to relieve Zach Edey at the 5. That was really about it. He was more of a 4-man before that. So yeah, it obviously was not ideal. But I think, like you said, even if Jacobson had been healthy, he, especially coming in as a freshman, was not the physical force that Purdue's 5 men
Right.
usually are. Even though he was 7'4", just didn't have a whole lot of weight on him. Would have been a different sort of 5 than what we're used to. So Oscar Cluff coming in is more the traditional 5-man we're used to Purdue having. Even though he's not over 7 feet tall, he's still close, and he's more of like, I think, the Travion Williams archetype in the sense that he really knows how to move with the ball, move without the ball. Get his post ups. He's a lot more crafty, I think, even than what you would see from Zach Edey, because Edey just used his huge size and height to score and to use that. Whereas Cluff is a little bit more down to earth with the size. 6'11" is nothing unrealistic, like Zach Edey was, but he's a little more crafty the way that he moves without the ball, gets it, and then his footwork in the post when he's trying to score. So that's pretty exciting for me as a fan, just to see a little bit more crafty big men that are going to be able to score well. So I think Cluff probably starts just because of his experience and because Jacobson has still only played 2 college basketball games, Division I college basketball games. So I think he will get the nod because of his experience and his skill, but definitely Jacobson could work his way in there depending on the matchups Purdue wants to play, depending on the system, and if Jacobson develops to be just a more skilled and better player than Cluff. But I think Cluff definitely shores up a lot of those weaknesses Purdue had, and with his experience and his size and the way that he plays is going to fit pretty well into what they're wanting to do.
I take that back. I misspoke when I said that he led the nation. He was second in the nation in rebounding. So, but he averaged 17.6. I think you're right with Oscar Cluff. I think what he provides, like we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about Jacobson, is he's going to provide Jacobson with another facet of being able to learn from somebody to build upon his game. And I think that's a big thing with Cluff being a back to the basket in the post type of center. Jacobson will have that to learn from and learn some of those moves as he adds weight. And I think Oscar Cluff is where it's at. I mean, he was 8th in the nation in shooting, which is incredible, with field goal percentage. 63.4%. That's huge. When you've got that, and I don't want to hear from anybody that would be critical of it saying, well, he did play at South Dakota State. It doesn't matter. It's D1 basketball. You're still dealing with guys that were one of their best players on their team, if not the best player in their team in high school. So you're playing against guys that know how to play basketball. They're not just some guy that came off the street and hadn't played in 5 years. They're athletes, and granted, will it take some time for Oscar to get used to playing at the Big Ten level day in and day out? Maybe a little, but he's a senior. He played at Washington State, so he knows bigger D1 schools. And at the time that he was there, they were still in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 still did exist. So he's got some Power 5 experience, even if it was his early years, as a basketball player. But I think he's going to provide a lot for, even as a teacher or a guide, while still trying to strive himself. He's going to help that sophomore in Jacobson to build him. And I think we're going to see Jacobson make some strides too because of having Cluff in that lineup.
I think that goes for Raleigh Burgess as well. That should be, especially because Burgess
Agreed.
probably is closer of a player to like what
Yeah.
Cluff is, the post up, and not quite as tall as what Jacobson is. Also, I'm glad you brought up the competition, because I think that is a concern for Cluff, is that he has scored 17 points, 12 rebounds against mid-major competition for the most part, but hasn't. I mean, who knows whether he can translate that to the Big Ten when he's playing bigger, more skilled, big guys. Like Derek Queen won't be back, but he'll be playing players similar to Derek Queen as opposed
Right.
to maybe 6'9" centers from your mid-major schools. But I think it's important to note they played a game against Alabama, South Dakota State did, and Cluff was 21 points, 15 rebounds. So,
Yeah.
if anything, one of his better games. They did give up 105 as a team, but that's just the way Alabama plays, and Alabama was with their shooting and their fast pace. So you can't.
Well, we saw that in the tournament. You know what I mean?
Right. Like they were scoring 100 points on Kentucky. So
right.
You can't knock the team for giving up that much. I am going to be interested to see how Cluff defends. He's not like a killer rim protector. He can block some shots here and there, but yeah, Jacobson is more the rim protector. Because Cluff isn't 7'2", like obviously he doesn't have an advantage with this size when it comes to defense against most players that he's going to be guarding. And then you look at the mixtapes too, like that's basically what we're going off of, is these highlight mixtapes from Oscar Cluff, and most of those are offensive highlights. So we haven't seen him
most of the time highlights are.
Yeah, I am working under the impression that he's just kind of average in the post defensively, where he's not going to get chewed up every time, but he's not like this big defensive stopper either. And that's still an upgrade, honestly, from what Purdue had last year with
what I was going to say.
Caleb First, Chakoff, and Ren to guard those guys. So it still gets better, but it's when Jacobson's not in the game, when Cluff is in the game, if we're assuming that they're going to basically split minutes, or they're not going to play together all that much, is kind of what I would assume. Who knows in reality? But if we work with that assumption, they're still not going to have like a major defensive stopper at the 5 like what Zach Edey was. But when Jacobson's in, they will have that. So it'll be an interesting trade-off. I don't think, though, that Cluff will be the major defensive stopper in the post.
Well, it's like you said, even if he's average, that's an upgrade from what they had. They were well below average at the rim with protection defensively come, last year after Jacobson was gone. And it's again, not knocking the efforts by who were in there. They're not designed to be that type of player, or that play that position with that effectiveness. We were playing center by committee, basically, trying to put the right person in there at the right time. And I truly think you have somebody even at average. Purdue doesn't have their 4-game losing streak. They might win, they might beat Michigan State. Maybe they lose 2 out of those 4. And one of those wins is against Michigan State, and it pulls them down, and one against Michigan. So all of a sudden you're looking at Purdue as the 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament, or even maybe if the cards fall right, the 1 seed, maybe they do get the championship, or at least a tie. I'm not rehashing, what if. I'm just saying you get average play at the rim. That there's a big difference at what happens, I think, outcome of the season wise. And for Purdue to have been that, and I'll say this, that good after losing Zach Edey says a lot about what that roster has. And the fact that only one person from that team basically that contributed majorly in Caleb First is gone. And I'm not meaning Cam Heide and Colvin didn't contribute, but they weren't starters. They were role players. So I'm going to go in that aspect. The fact that they had that coming back next year, that's the reason the hype is so big. It's valid, I think, very, very valid as to why Purdue thinks this should be our year.
Yeah, the way that Purdue plays, or at least has played like this past season, and the way their roster is looking when they're constructing it and whatnot, it feels like their identity is going to be more on the offensive end than the defensive end. But the defensive end isn't going to come quite as naturally, but I think they're going to be pretty good. with Jakari Harris, CJ Cox taking another step. I love what those guys do defensively. Smith with his ability to steal the ball and read the offense as well as he reads the defense. If we're being honest, that is a lot of upside for Purdue defensively, and then having a better presence in the post to help guard the big guys, also to protect the rim, helps them a lot. And I think they're going to be able to make a lot of strides where people don't expect them to defensively. And if they have a really strong defense, their offense is going to be practically unguardable because you have Oscar
Yeah.
Cluff. When he's in, he's primarily going to be like your fourth or fifth option. And he's a guy that averaged 17.6 points a game at South Dakota
Right.
State as the number one option. So
Right.
now, like, his numbers probably won't be that high because he's just not going to get the touches and the shots that he would get at South Dakota State. But he was an efficient producer. I think that will translate. He should be efficient at Purdue. And he is just potentially going to get so many more, or his opportunities will be better because the defense will be focusing on TKR, who scored 20 points a game in the Big Ten, and Braden Smith, who's potentially the player of the year nationally and whatnot. So that will be really interesting to see how Cluff's production changes for the better because he's going to be your fourth or fifth option most of the time he's in.
I think his numbers will go down, but I think that his addition will make Purdue that much better. And so he may only average 9 points a game, if that, but it's going to be, like you said, they're going to be it's going to be a couple of dunks from, Braden Smith going and driving down and trying to get to the hole, and they collapse on him, and all of a sudden Cluff's wide open under the basket, for a dunk. Or TKR, who passes very well for his size, gets double teamed, and all of a sudden Cluff's underneath the basket all by himself. I think he's going to be advantageous with his baskets. I think he'll get, there'll be games that he scores 18, maybe even 20 points because he's that good of a player, but they don't need him to be, and they didn't bring him in necessarily to average, like you said, the 17 points. They brought him in to be another option. And Purdue's got 3 already really good options that we know of, and maybe even a fourth, depending on who that other person is in the starting lineup, depending on who it is. That Cluff is like the icing on the cake, man. It literally is one of those that we need you to be a defensive body. We need you to rebound. And hey, by the way, once in a while you can score. Not giving him permission, but he's able to score. You know what I mean?
Another aspect too, I love the way that he screens and seals.
Yes.
I think Braden Smith's gonna have a lot of fun being creative with that. He's just another great ball screen guy because he can move, so he can roll pretty well, but also he can seal if somebody's driving in the lane. He's really crafty in that area, kind of like I was talking about with his footwork when he's posting up and trying to score. Similarly, he's really good at sealing and screening really well, which is just going to help Matt Painter have his options offensively. I mean, we know how creative Matt Painter is as an offensive coordinator, and PJ Thompson along with that, who has dealt a lot with the offense these last couple of years. They're going to have so many options with the way they can play, with Cluff as a screener, TKR in the pick and roll with their high screen that we saw with Smith and TKR last year, Fletcher and Omer Meyer being added into those mix. They have multiple guys that can play those different roles between ball screens and all their different sets and stuff. That's really going to give them a lot of options, and it's going to throw a lot of defenses for a loop. It's another reason why it makes this offense pretty unguardable.
Well, yeah, and think about this is, there are teams that have a big man that can defend the pick and roll, either by switching to the point guard for a split second to keep him from driving or fight through the screen to get, to keep with the big man on the roll. Most teams don't have 2, and if Purdue's running TKR and Oscar Cluff, both with the potential of running a pick and roll off of, and they both do it really well, you're kind of at the mercy of what Purdue wants to do. As long as they're operating functionally, that is a defensive nightmare to have to defend 2 big guys that can do a pick and roll really well.
And you can't zone them because Purdue shooters are just too good. Smith, Lawyer, Meyer, Murphy when he's in the game, Cox, like all those guys can knock down threes at a high clip. yeah, it's going to be a really exciting offense, and it's just going to make Purdue a championship level team. And
Yeah.
we're going to lead into Liam Murphy too, and how he adds to that. But every time we talk about it, it just brings a new level of excitement.
Well, let's talk about Mr. Murphy. I'm looking at his stats. He played his first 2 years at Columbia University in the Ivy League, and then he transferred to North Florida for last season, where he averaged 13 points, 3.3 rebounds, 1.4 assists. But the big thing, Grant, 42% from behind the 3-point line. It looks like we're getting a very, very good a role player that will sub in and spell lawyer for a spell. And you know what? It may be one of those that, oh well, this game Murphy's getting so hot we can't put lawyer back in that much.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put him back in, but it can only make defenses even more tired trying to come in or letting another guy come in that's spelling one of the best shooters in the Big Ten coming in. Oh, he needs to take a rest, and they just replaced him with a guy that can shoot it almost as equally as good, if not a little bit better percentage-wise.
It'll be interesting to see how he fits into the lineup as far as position, because he is very similar to Lawyer in the way that he's more of a pure shooter and whatnot. He
But he's
also,
6'7".
yeah, he's 6'7". I honestly think he's more of a 4 in this Purdue lineup, but that doesn't mean he can't come in and spell Lawyer, because he also could potentially play the 3. And if you have Lawyer could play the 2, but then you put Murphy in to spell Lawyer, but you shift other guys up to fill the 2 and the 3, and it still works. Murphy, though he's primarily a shooter, and that when you watch the highlights and stuff, that's what you're going to see is him shooting really quickly. He has a nice quick release. He shoots from all areas of the court. Looks really, really good as a shooter. He's not a one-trick pony either. He can drive the ball. He can
Right.
score in the post if he's down there. Sometimes you see these guys that are more pure shooters, but if they get inside the arc, they can't even shoot, because they're going to either get blocked, they just don't really have the craftiness down low to score. But Murphy does. So if guys are overplaying him and he can backdoor and cut or just drive around, he can score that way too, which is really important. I think 2019 Brian Klein, if it wasn't a 3-pointer or a mid-range, he wasn't really going to score. Like he wasn't a driver really at all. I don't know what his layup count was, but it was really, really small. In my opinion, Murphy is going to be better down low in that area if he finds himself there. Not that they'll go to that, like they're never gonna run a play necessarily from Murphy to score
Right.
in the post. But if he finds himself in that position, I think he can score. And I think that's actually a really important piece to Murphy's offensive game. So he's a great shooter. He can also get inside if he has to do a backdoor cut or some sort of screen or something like that. He can pass the ball really well. I think that's a theme we've seen with all of Purdue's additions in this roster, is that they all have the ability to pass and to create assists, which is really important when you have other great options on the team. I think the biggest question for Murphy probably is kind of like Cluff defensively. Can he guard higher level players and not be a liability? I
Right.
think he probably can, because he can move pretty well. He's like Gillis, except he can move a lot better. So if he's guarding a stretch 4, I think he's going to fare better. But still, his athleticism isn't as high as what you're going to see from some Big Ten guys. That's a question mark. But I think he fits a great role as far as coming off the bench and providing shooting primarily.
ESPN has him down as a forward, but we know that Matt Painter's not beholden to the little letter next to your name. So, he could be a 6'7" guard filling in for Lawyer, but at the same time, he may come in for Lawyer, but CJ Cox or Jakari Harris moves up to the number 2 spot or the 2 guard spot and lets Murphy be the 3 spot. I think that's all kind of semantics when it comes to the fact of, he is the 3, he is a forward. Hey, if he's playing somebody that's smaller than him, he might post him up. I don't know. I haven't seen enough of his game to see if he's got a good post game against a smaller guy. But like you said, he can stretch that 4 out to him, to the perimeter, and he's going to be able to maybe drive by him, to where, you're not safe putting a certain a guy on him because he can shoot the lights out. So you've got to close out on him. You've got to stay close to him. You can't, play back in the defense into the paint. And it opens up in the lane a lot more to where maybe TKR gets some more openings. And it's all kind of the same prognosis or expectation as when you've got Lawyer in the lineup, is he stands out beyond the arc, and you can't play back off of him because he's going to shoot the ball and he's going to make a good percentage of the shots he takes. I think Murphy, yes, there's going to be a learning curve. Yes, there's going to be an adjustment to the Big Ten, just like Cluff. But at the same time, what's the one thing that you always worry about come NCAA tournament? If they've got a shooter, it doesn't matter what school they're from or what school they played at. If they're playing you in the NCAA tournament and they can shoot lights out, they can beat you. See Oakland against Kentucky. I mean, yeah.
Right, yeah. I think for this Purdue team, with their front court, their offense, the more shooters you have, the better. You have to be able to make teams pay if you could open from 3. I think Murphy's addition is almost more of a direct result of Cam Heidi's departure. I think they are similar styles of players. They shoot the ball well. Murphy does not have the athleticism that Cam Heidi had, so that's a bit of a downside, except I think Murphy's a better shooter. So there's a plus to having Liam Murphy. But I think he can come in too if you want to play either small ball with TKR at the 5, or TKR is getting a rest and you have either Cluff or Jacobson at the 5. I think he comes in and Purdue plays more of a 4 out, 1 in type of situation like they did with Edey. And so now you have 4 shooters surrounding him. It could be Lawyer, Murphy, Braden Smith, CJ Cox, or Omar
Goodness, can you imagine that?
Yeah, that would be insane, especially with TKR in the post, or Cluff, anyone who could draw a double team. Now, what do you do? Because all 4 of those guys, if they're open, they're gonna make it. I guess they're just that good as shooters. So that's the kind of creativity Liam Murphy provides Matt Painter and that offensive staff. If you don't have Liam Murphy, you don't really have a shooter that can also play the 4. You're pretty restricted to playing TKR and one of the 5s. Makes it harder to give TKR a rest, or you're going to sacrifice some size at the 4 because now you're going to play 4 guards and a big. So I think that from a lineup standpoint, Liam Murphy's addition really helps Purdue in that way.
Do you think Coach Painter goes to bed at night just smiling ear to ear every night, just going to bed going, this is great?
Yeah, his offseason has been phenomenal. This Purdue roster couldn't have shaped up a whole lot better, in my opinion. And Painter has consistently made good decision after good decision, and then he capitalizes on those decisions. So I think we can all have pretty good faith that this roster is a good roster, but it's also going to function well come the season. We've seen good rosters be assembled in the past from other schools that did not perform in the season.
Right.
And we're gonna see this roster come to fruition, I think.
Well, and let's call it what it is. Matt Painter and his coaching staff are not perfect in their evaluation. They're not perfect in their recruiting, but what it seems like is they hit a lot more singles and doubles than home runs, simply because they're not trying to hit home runs. They're bringing in guys that they turn into home runs by the end of their tenure. But when they get them, they're like, oh yeah, they got a nice recruit there. Braden Smith didn't come in highly touted, and now by his senior year, he might be the player of the year, or he's at least going to be a candidate starting out the season, and he could be player of the year by the end of it. But there are players that are going to miss, and not produce the way that they kind of thought maybe they would and stuff. But here's the thing. I trust him implicitly in the fact that he's been doing this for a really long time. We've talked to former players that played for him back at the beginning of his career, and he was much the same style of coach then than he is now. He hasn't changed. He's adjusted, but he hasn't changed who he is as a coach. And that's why I think I trust him as much as I do with his evaluation and the players that he brings in because of that.
Not everyone pans out the way that they plan. They lost 4 players to the transfer portal this year, and I think some, if not all of them, could be described that way, where they just didn't quite, become the players that Coach Painter expected or that we expected as fans.
Right.
Um, but, like, when you go the way that Matt Painter goes, where you take lower level recruits, turn them into great players, and that's kind of your method and your formula, you're gonna have some that just don't do what you expect, and
Right.
you're gonna have some that ultimately, um, that that just don't pan out. And you'll have that if you bring in a 5-star too. You look at Duke, not
Sure.
every 5-star they bring in goes to the NBA right away or is as an All-American or whatever. Like, they sometimes have some ratings that just don't end up performing the way that they were supposed to. Purdue has the same thing, but the nice thing about Purdue is 75% of the time, they're pretty much right on, or at least close enough that the players they have still are impactful, that when they don't happen, it doesn't kill you, and eventually some of those guys leave, and you bring in new guys that work well, and it works. Whereas if you do rely on 5-star recruits and highly touted transfers and they don't pan out, now you're kind of in trouble because every year you're doing this, and if they don't pan out, those are the guys you're expecting to be your superstars. Now you got no one left to turn to. Purdue doesn't have to face that situation with their method, and the coaching staff is good enough that they typically are in pretty good situations with the players they have.
Well, it's like Mike DeCourcy said, when you do what Matt Painter's been doing for so long, you're not going to get, you don't have to guarantee the players that are coming in that are going to play. Like Cooper Flag. Nobody was recruiting him saying we can get you playing time as a freshman. You automatically knew. And that's why I think the Cannon Catching situation worked out the way it did. Was Catchings was worried he wasn't going to get any guaranteed playing time, and Matt Painter told him that's not what we do here. We just don't. And I think that falls into the same sort of category of, the players that he's going to recruit. He's going after those top players. He's making contact with them at the very least. But maybe those players just don't see Purdue as fitting their style. And that's fine, because Matt Painter's made a career on the lesser starred players. So I think it's definitely one of those that he'll get some of those 5-stars, Jaden Ivey coming, Caleb Swanigan coming in, back in the day, highly touted players will come to Purdue, but not on the regularity that they go to Duke, that they go to, these bigger schools, Kansas, in some extent Michigan State, depending on the relationship they have with Izzo and stuff. I mean, it's just one of those that Izzo's a little bit of an anomaly. He gets the high starred ones, but yet he's very much like Matt Painter in this is how we do it. This is the way we're going to do it. We're not going to adjust for you. And but I think 20 years into the game, I've been saying, eventually he'll get the 5-stars. They'll just start coming. Honestly, I don't care if he gets the 5-stars. I want the ones that fit the culture and fit the team the best. And that's where I'm saying I trust him enough that he's been doing this long enough. Him and his staff, they're going to nail this down and get a great roster. And honestly, they still have a roster spot open. They could add somebody. I doubt they do, but they could. You just never know. There are still when the transfer portal window closes, it's when they have to enter by. I don't know that there's a deadline for them to commit anywhere. They just have to be in the portal in order to be able to freely transfer. So there is a possibility. I don't hold my breath and don't expect anything, because this roster as is pretty darn good. And I think we've got a lot to look forward to come October, November.
I think they probably leave that spot open, but I think it gives them flexibility in the recruiting this season. They've already been in touch with a lot of different high school recruits. Some of them rated pretty well. I don't know that they've been talking to any actual 5-stars, but some pretty high 4-stars. And for Purdue, that's still pretty good. So I think they probably leave that spot open, but I think they are going to recruit pretty well, because you're going to lose probably 5 guys at least to graduation this season with Murphy, Cluff, Smith, Boyer, TKR. So they're going to have 5 spots open from that. Who knows what they'll lose in the portal, but they could probably recruit 5 or 6 freshmen if they want to for this next class. And if they can put together a nice recruiting class, especially with a couple of those higher 4-stars that maybe slide inside the top 50 or 60 in the ESPN top 100, like that's a pretty good recruiting class
Sure
for
it is.
Purdue. And we know what Matt Painter can do with talent. So
Yep.
that's kind of what I think happens. But I think just having that extra spot still provides a lot of excitement and upside to what this roster can look like in the future, even after all these guys go away.
Yep. So, all right. Well, that brings us to the end of the Friday edition of Boilermaker Lounge. If you're keeping score, that means we have only 3 more player evaluations left. And if you're paying attention, you know exactly those 3. We saved those guys for last. That we'll cover those in the next week or so. But that's the end of today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. For Grant Flora, I'm Sam Springer. We'll see you on Tuesday.